Right, it is top of the hour. We will go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone who has joined us today for the first webinar in our subject matter expert series. This is the first of several in 2025. I'm Rachel Paul with IAAP. And before we get started, just a couple housekeeping items to share with you. We do have closed captioning available. You can select the closed caption icon in the bottom of your Zoom screen and also post it in the chat in just a second. I'll have stream text links offered in several languages if you'd like to view captions that way. We do have American Sign Language provided today. We have audience microphones muted to prevent any background noise or disruptions. We'll be monitoring the chat for any general questions or technical issues. We'll have Q&A at the end of the webinar, and we will be watching for that. And today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll make the recording available to everyone afterwards. So I'm very excited today to introduce our presenter, Dawn Parker. Welcome, Dawn. I'll let you take it away. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Let me grab my slide. That would be helpful. All right. So thank you so much, Rachel, for that introduction. And hello, everyone, or in my case, good morning, everyone, because it is 6 o'clock in the morning here where I live in Australia. So good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. As an Australian, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today. For me, that is the Camaragal people of the Eora Nation, Sydney, Australia, as was also known as. And I would love to pay my respects to any elders past, present, and emerging that might be on this call. If you are also in Australia or wherever you are, I would encourage you to take a moment to think whose land you're on. And I would absolutely recommend learning a little bit more about the people whose land you're on as well. So hello, my name is Dawn Parker. I am an accessible game designer, but I'm also an e-learning coordinator at Cerebral Palsy Alliance here in Australia. I'm also, I wear many hats. I'm also an audio designer, and the game I'm currently working on that's not under NDA is called Doggy Don't Care, which is on Steam to Wishlist. And I also love seals. So you'll see some seals pop up every now and then. A visual description of me for those who would like it. I am a Caucasian woman in my 30s with visible tattoos. I have long dark brown hair, and I wear glasses with yellow lenses because I have glare sensitivity and photophobia. Yeah, so that's a bit about me, but let's get into the reason why we're all here today, which is, the what and why of accessible video game design. So what is video game accessibility? I think it's a really good idea to break this down into 3 main ideas of what actually is an accessible video game. So it's a game that can be accessed, engaged, played, and completed by anyone, regardless of who you are, if you have a disability, where you're from, regardless, this game can be played and completed by you. It's a game that has different player groups in mind. And what I mean by that, it doesn't just cater for people with disabilities. It could cater for someone who might only play handheld consoles, someone who might only play on the computer, someone who might not have a great internet connection, but is still able to play the game. It's designed with different groups of people who play the video game in mind. And the last one is, it's a video game that has challenges that does not actually turn into a blocker. When you play a game, you might like to play the game because it's a challenging game, but you don't want that challenge to become a blocker from actually completing the game. It's something that Mark Barley likes to talk about as well, and I think it really resonates with me. To start with those who have, maybe people have no idea what I mean by video game accessibility, here are the 5 main categories that can come up when you're talking about video game accessibility. So there's motor, vision, cognition, hearing, and speech. Now, what this means is to have a game that's accessible for motor would be things like adaptive controllers, mechanics, being able to re-input controllers. For vision, this is something that would relate to, colorblind options, spatial audio, and high contrast modes. Cognition is quite a big topic. So what I'll say on that is, to me, cognition is about having a simplified tutorial or a tutorial that you can kind of understand. It has adjustable difficulty levels for puzzles of the actual game, and the instructions are super clear as well. Hearing would relate to something like having subtitles, visual cues, and haptic vibrations, which can act as a secondary indicator or sometimes even replace audio feedback. And then speech, this is kind of around text-to-speech communication, voice command integration, or even offering just an alternative way to communicate within a video game. So those are the 5 main areas that I would like to break it up into when it comes to talking about video game accessibility. If you'd love to learn more about them in a bit more detail, I would highly recommend checking out the gaming accessibility guidelines and the Xbox accessibility guidelines. They're both, well, the GAG is actually a living document that gets updated a lot of the time, and that has a really good indication of how these areas can be broken down into a bit more detail. For this talk, we're not going to go into as much detail on all 5 of these things. We're going to be looking at 3 games with varying aspects of game design for accessibility. I can tell you right now, the one we will not be talking about today is speech, but we will be talking about, motor, vision, cognition, and hearing. So just a heads up. So the next question is, why? Why video game accessibility? Rachel told me that 300 people signed up for this webinar, and that blew me away. And I was also half awake when she told me this, as it was 5:30 in the morning, and I was like, that's crazy. But then it made me remember 3 billion people play video games worldwide. And of those 3 billion people, 20% will have a disability and 70% will use ALI or accessibility features. That's a crazy number. What's even crazier to me is the economics behind the video game industry. The gaming industry generates $200 billion annually. That's more than movies. That's more than music. That is an insane amount of money to generate because of the interactiveness. And it kind of leads into the next point, which is the social aspect. Video games are all about fostering communities and belonging. And it means people can get together and enjoy a game in another way. During COVID, for example, when we were all stuck at home, people were playing video games a lot more as well, to play with their friends, to play with, their family, to play with people, to still have that social interaction and connection. And through that, we develop massive communities. And we're going to talk about that as well in the first game we're talking about today. And the last point is the technology side, the innovation in technology. So we have things like adaptive controllers and haptic feedback, which can make being inclusive in your game really achievable. And there are games out there which do work with screen readers, which do work with voiceover and talkback, the phone screen readers. And then we do have games which work with voice commands and eye gaze systems. So we have the technology as well to support our games. So that's kind of more about the why. Let's actually chat about the how. So how do we design a game to make a difference in someone's life? When I was thinking about this topic, I tend to think very visually, and I kind of just imagined someone on a tightrope, kind of balancing, a pole of some kind. And I tried to contextualize it, and I've kind of deemed it a sort of balancing act. So The balancing act of this would definitely come down to being innovative and being inclusive. How do you balance this? So in this case, it'd be about, balancing the technology you have already, which could be, a gaming console's already established accessibility features, like the PS5 and the Xbox Series X now have screen readers in them. The Nintendo Switch has it's got a magnifying zoom. But then we also have the physical as well. We have adaptive controllers. We have eye gaze systems. How do we balance that with the design of our game, the actual workings of our game? It's also about design and technology. Again, how do we balance that? How do we make sure, that we can change inputs and that input will work on an adaptive controller? How do we balance the features? We could have features like on the screen here, which is an example of a high contrast mode. So in this case, the screen is black, but the player is green, the enemy is blue, and the enemy is green, sorry, it's 6 a.m. The player is green, the enemy is red, and the pickup is blue. So we could have that mode. We could also have things like what The Last of Us does, which has a really intense zoom as well. We could have a zoom function for the entire game. And how do we balance that again with adaptive controllers? What if I wanted to play this game on high contrast mode with an adaptive controller and I want to change the inputs? How do we balance that? And that also falls under another category, which is about the advancements. So for this, I'm talking about advancements in AR and VR, so augmented reality and virtual reality, advancements in new eye tracking systems and adaptive AI. These are really cool ways to make things more accessible as well. And how do we balance our game with those? So I guess what I'm trying to say is with this balancing act idea, when we're designing a game, we have to be really innovative and clear while maintaining usability and accessibility. So then we also have to have the basics of this. So having an accessibility options menu. This way, we can allow players to tailor their experience to their needs. We might not need all the accessibility options, but having the variety there to pick and choose is really important. This is a screenshot, I believe, from Gears of War, I believe. And there's a couple of different options on there. We have large text chat, we have high contrast UI, we have speech to text, which is in brackets, it says English only. We have speech recognition mode, we have text to speech, we have menu narration. So all these options are there. We might not need them all, but they're there for us to use. And remember, 70% of people who play games will use these features. The next thing is understanding assistive technology. So we need to incorporate compatibility with adaptive controllers, screen readers, and other assistive devices. And they're always getting updated. They're always getting explored. And it's a really cool thing to have in your game. And it means it's a much more inclusive game. Like with a lot of accessibility people, we always talk about testing with real users. And the same thing applies for video games. Like you would test a website, an app, you have to test a video game with real users. And we do that by involving players with disabilities in usability testing. And then the developers and designers can gain real feedback back with it. And it also helps us identify barriers and make necessary improvements before the release of the game. So let's get into the examples. Now, I have 3 examples here to show you. I am not affiliated with any of them, only that I like playing them. And these are kind of my observations. So one example is going to be the first example, which is Baldur's Gate. Now, why did I choose this game? One, because I actually can't stop playing it. It has consumed my entire life, especially when it got released to PlayStation 5. So I actually mainly play on consoles because I can use accessibility features and it's easier for me to play on a console. And 2, Baldur's Gate 3 is a fantastic example of a text-based game that has a lot of speech. And it's a really great example of how you would adapt a PC game to a console. So for those of you who might not know what this game is, Baldur's Gate 3 was developed by Larian Studios. And it's a really great game of a Dungeons and Dragons campaign encapsulated into a PC game. So the whole thing is turn-based in combat, and there's a lot of text as well. And the characters are fantastic. The overall layout is great. But Baldur's Gate 3 is a fantastic example of how you can start as a PC game and then adapt into a console game. So the strengths of Baldur's Gate is, again, the intensive text-to-speech options. There's amazing subtitles there. There's lots of different difficulty modes as well. If you've never played Dungeons and Dragons, there's a fantastic range of difficulty to explore. And the community is really inclusive. There are so many great mods out there in the community, which can actually make the game more accessible as well. And the community is there to help each other. But the issues with Baldur's Gate, a lot of people would find, is the tutorial style. The Baldur's Gate tutorial is akin to someone just kicking you into a pool and saying, all right, now you can swim, which is incredibly difficult, especially if you've never played a game like this before. If you have no idea what Dungeons and Dragons is, you never even played a game like this, it can be really challenging. And the other issue that I personally found was the text scaling and the UI. So this is what we're going to have a talk about with Baldur's Gate and finding the balance between all the great features it has and the issues that it has. So for this, let's chat about console-specific readability. So this is about how Larian was able to create their UI readable for the PlayStation, which is where the screenshot is on screen. This is a picture of one of the action menus, which instead of on PC, where it's like a grid down the bottom with all the spells and actions you can do, Larian made it as a wheel on the PlayStation, which kind of also falls into the way a PlayStation controller works. You can just flick the analog stick. On an adaptive controller, you have an analog stick, you have a stick as well, and you can circle around. So for console-specific readability settings, we can ensure that players have equal access without losing the game's depth. Baldur's Gate 3 is massive. It's a huge game. It's split up into, 3 to 4 acts. There's a lot going on. And by having, how you can do things in an accessible way, instead of having down the bottom, having it in a scroll wheel, it might be easier to see. It might be easier to get your head around. That being said, it's still a really big thing. And it's still a huge game with so many different things. As you level up, you gain more abilities, you gain more items, you gain more actions. So it can still be a bit overwhelming. The benefits that this would come from, and what I found, is for vision. For someone like me who's got glare sensitivity, and I play on a TV and a console, this is a lot more readable to me than it would be if I'm playing on not a PlayStation, a PC. And it could also help with the cognitive aspect, where everything is laid out in a way that I can see it, like down the bottom. I can see my actions, my bonus actions, spell slots, etc. And on the side there, you can see it's got a button guide, a legend almost. So, X to select. You can customize the radials as well by pressing square. So you could reduce and put things in, and then, circle for close. The guideline to check this out, or to kind of go hand in hand with this one, would be the Xbox Accessibility Guideline for text readability. You can also scale the text in Baldur's Gate 3, both on PC and on console, and that's built into the accessibility options menu. And there's great guidelines as well for UI customization in the XAG2, which kind of goes into the next game we're going to have a chat about, which is Metaphor or ReFantazio. This is another console-based game. I believe it's on PlayStation and Xbox, but I think it's on PC as well. Correct me if I'm wrong. So Metaphor ReFantazio was developed by Atlas Studios. These are the same guys who do Persona, Shin Megami Tensei. And one of the strengths of this game is the tutorial is very linear, as is the plot and the story of this game. It's linear. It's from start to finish, and you learn the game as you go, rather than in Baldur's Gate, where you find an area and they'll give you a tutorial for it. The design of Metaphor ReFantazio has really strong contrast in terms of color, size, experimenting with different shapes. It's all pretty legible. And the soundtrack of Metaphor ReFantazio, as with most Atlas games, is incredible. The design of it is also really cool. That sort of Renaissance style. I believe one of the skill trees is based on the Vitruvian Man by Da Vinci, which is the guy with all the arms. Very cool design. But the issue I have with Metaphor ReFantazio, and a lot of people have chatted about this, is there's UI animations everywhere, even just on the dialogue boxes. Now, I don't have videos of this because it makes me feel a bit queasy, but if you'd love to Google it, I would absolutely recommend it if you're capable of just Googling some gameplay footage of Metaphor ReFantazio, and you can see that sometimes the dialogue box has little animations on it and the camera also shakes. This can be really disorienting, especially with that camera movement. It can kind of throw you off, and you'll notice it just moves a little bit, but it's still enough to kind of increase your cognitive load. So, how would you balance this? What's the balancing act for this? Well, it's about toggling and having the ability to turn it on and off by allowing players to just toggle UI animation settings. This is a still of the game, so this is not moving. It is a still of the dialogue box, which you can see has great contrast. It's black with white text. And then you have your choices on the side, which is white text, which is black text on a white background, and it's highlighted in red. If this was just still, it's not in the game. If this was still, this would be fantastic. This would be great because we're maintaining the artistic style while still being accessible. The guideline to check this out would be in the gaming accessibility guidelines, which is to provide an option to reduce visual complexity and motion, because a lot of people will get motion sickness, and this isn't even with a VR set. This would really benefit someone who has cognition, vision, or even processing, just being able to process what's going on. Now, the majority of this game is actually voiced. There's dialogue to go with it. So if you don't want to look at the screen, you don't have to. But we do have to look at the screen sometimes to figure out what's going on and who's who. We can very clearly see Maria is talking, and I believe this cutscene was voiced, but it's still annoying to have a little camera shake or the fact that the dialogue box lights up and moves around with the white swirls. There's another gaming accessibility guideline I would love to chat about, which is avoid distracting background movement. This game is all about the cognitive load. So we don't want to increase the cognitive load of a player by having these little movements and having these little distractions when there's already such a big lore in the game, which is designed beautifully. This is where the balancing act comes in. How do we have such a beautiful game with amazing lore, amazing art, amazing design choices, but these two little things can completely wreck someone's cognitive load? So this would be a great balancing act to really talk about. So a lot of people I talk to when it comes to gaming accessibility will be, but my art's fantastic. My art is beautiful. Why does it matter? Well, and to that I say you can have beautiful art and design in your games. It's encouraged, but it needs to be accessible and legible. There's another fantastic game called Blanc, which is BLANC. And that game is entirely black and white. It is entirely perfectly contrasted, but the choices in that game are simple enough to understand as well. And the art's beautiful. We need to just kind of find a balance between having your beautiful designs and having it inclusive, usable, and accessible. And I think a lot of the time with games like these that are so big, a lot of people will tend to just get lost in the art, and that's fine. You can get lost in the art. It's a beautiful game, but it needs to be accessible. Again, on this screen here, we have, the legend. So we can press L to look at the log, R for the memoriam, and A to confirm. So this is an Xbox screenshot. The last game I wanted to have a chat about is Super Fruit Ninja. Now, you're probably saying, why did you pick this? Well, this is kind of the technology advancement that I was talking about earlier with AR and VR. The game Super Fruit Ninja is so iconic. It's a really popular game that we all probably played on our phone of swiping to, slice up fruits. The symbols and the shapes of this game are easily recognizable. And another thing was it was actually a showcased game when the Apple Vision Pro came out. And this is kind of what interests me about it is where are video games heading in the future? So VR games have been around for a while, and there's a lot of development going on. So how can we make sure as we progress through this generation of VR, XR, AR, that our content is still accessible? The weakness with Super Fruit Ninja, particularly on a VR setting, is the calibration and the headset itself. I recently started a new job at Cerebral Palsy Alliance as the e-learning coordinator, and that's really opened my eyes to understanding what cerebral palsy is. It's a very complex neuromotor functional disease. Not disease, it's something you're born with, I apologize. You're born with cerebral palsy, but it means your muscles are weaker. So when we're playing on a particular headset, for example, like this one is, which was the next screenshot, that's quite a heavy headset. It's quite taxing to wear. So what would this game look like, example, in AR glasses? Or what would this look like on a Quest, which is noticeably lighter? So how do we have these technology advancements with the design to make it unique and balanced? So this would be, from a design perspective, from a software perspective, having a scalable AR setting that uses the Vision Pro or any headsets, built-in accessibility features for players to customize their settings. So this is about utilizing what we have already. The Vision Pro has, and this is what Jessica Gowd said at one of the Vision Pro days I got to attend in Sydney. The Vision Pro has every single accessibility option that Apple has had through the years. And the Vision Pro voiceover will work out of the box just by tapping the digital crown 3 times. So it's there, it's ready to use. And by utilizing all these features, such as voiceover, such as gesture controls, you can further enhance the gameplay experience just by having that option again to change the settings. There is an APX design pattern by Able Gamers Charity called multi-input options, which I think would be great for this sort of scenario. And what would this benefit? It would benefit those with motor.
I'm sorry, Dom. This is Rachel. I think your microphone went out. We're not hearing you.
I hear her fine.
Okay. Maybe
Can
it
you hear
was
me
me.
now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Oh, the chat can still hear. Amazing. Okay. Cool. How about we just go back to here and chat more about, oh, where did my camera go? Oh, my camera's turned off. Okay. Okay, I guess I'm doing this without a camera, so that's all right. So again, having scalable AR settings, having stuff in your game, such as the options menu, to be able to really put forward this idea of when we move into the future, what settings we're going to have. We can still have the same settings that we had on a console game or a PC game. How's that going to translate into VR? Having a thought about that. The concept of Super Fruit Ninja is near identical to Fruit Ninja, of slicing fruit that pops up. But there are still these ideas of how can we improve this. Aside from little visual effects, like I know when you slice a fruit in, yeah, I know, can't see me. I think my camera's turned off. for some reason. But it says it's still on. I think someone turned me off. That's all right. Of having, where was I? So enhancing this gameplay, I know with Super Fruit Ninja on the Apple Vision Pro, when you slice a fruit, it actually like splatters and it can go over your couch in the game, which is pretty funny and it's pretty great. And how do we, contain all this? What if we didn't want that? What if that's too distracting? Is there an option to be able to turn it off? Is there, enough features to kind of know what we're doing? Is there enough spatial audio? Spatial audio is what really excites me about the purpose of, or the prospect of having VR, AR, XR. How can we go about this with all the audio options we have and having to create a really cool 3D soundscape? So in terms of, designing for the future, where are video games going to go? So we can utilize all the accessibility features in all the different headsets out there. There's MetaQuest, there's Apple Vision Pro, there's now AR glasses as well. My uncle has a pair, which is pretty cool to watch him use it. And figure out what other limitations and what can we push in terms of designing and figuring out different gestures. Can we use controllers with them? How does the eye gaze system work? This is really great, and it can make such a big difference for accessibility in video games and really change the way we interact and play with video games. So as the development of AR continues, we really should be exploring various headsets for different uses. For example, going back to the idea of someone with cerebral palsy or someone who might not have a lot of muscle control or weak muscles, maybe we should use the AR glasses, which are lighter, and that might work a bit better. Headsets like MetaQuest, Android XR, which is coming out soon, and AVP, Apple Vision Pro, are wonderful toolkits to experiment with different designs and to really take advantage of their built-in accessibility options. There are different ways to do hand motor. There's different ways. Oh, there we go. No way. I can just turn my camera back on, I believe. Oh, no, that setting vanished. Okay. Yeah, start my video. That should be better. There we go. Fabulous. So when we're designing for different or, new landscapes, the Apple Vision Pro, the Android XR, and the MetaQuest are fantastic training grounds and development kits. So we can take advantage of their inbuilt accessibility options and have different ways to, control hand gestures, to use eye gaze, eye gaze, and motor functions. So the last thing is essentially, what next? Where do we go from here? We've looked at 3 amazing games, all with very different ideas, very different balancing acts, very different stories. Where do we go from here? You're probably thinking, well, this is great. How do I get involved? How should I have a look at designing games for a difference? I would start by trying to understand the importance of accessibility in game design. It's really important to have, and accessibility should absolutely be at the start of any project. The next thing would be the resources. So check out the guidelines and check out the design patterns. This is the Xbox Accessibility Guidelines, the APX Design Patterns, and Gaming Accessibility Guidelines. They are all free to look at. A quick Google search will do it, and to kind of understand where things are at. They're not necessarily a checklist form, but it's good to have a look at understanding what we can do with them. And as with a lot of accessibility talks, we have to test with real users. If you're working on a game and you need to find someone to test it, there are Discord servers, there are communities, there are local game nights in every area. Reaching out to say, hey, I have an idea for a game, or, my game's currently in alpha. I need someone to review the controls or have a look. Is the contrast correct? Does the UI make sense? I guarantee you that people are going to be interested and they're going to want to be a part of this. And this is a great way to make sure our games are accessible and they incorporate the features we need, especially when we have games with really dense puzzles or narratives or mechanics. And we need to be really important with our communities. Our communities are fantastic. Modern communities are incredible. There are incredible Reddit forums out there with so many great details and so many incredible stories of lived experience from so many different people from all walks of life. So it's really important to include those people when we're testing. And when you're thinking about your balancing act, okay, I have a great game with a really cool high contrast mode. How is this going to work with an eye gaze system, or how is this going to work? We can reach out and chat to people about their experience and have a think, okay, that's something we can definitely use. How can I make that work? I guess my takeaways from this would be to design with a purpose, not only a difference, but a purpose. So at the end of the day, people play games for fun and challenge. Is the game fun and inclusive for everyone? That should be what you're asking yourself when you come up with a game idea, or if you're an alpha or beta, about to hit gold. Is this game fun and inclusive? Does it make sense? And then, of course, just be curious and innovative. Try things. If it doesn't work, you know it doesn't work and you can test it again. Tinker, research, experiment, play games and figure out what you like and don't like and how you could make it better. And really just explore different avenues and ideas of what you can create. So thank you. Those are all the slides and the details I've put together. You can find me on LinkedIn under Dom Parker. My email address is on there. And thank you all so much for listening to me talk about this.
Thank you, Dom. This is Rachel. It's very interesting. We do have quite a few questions, so if we have a little bit of
Absolutely.
time here. So the first question, I know you talked a little bit about involving end users in the process. So we did have a question about how someone wants to help developers with their input as being a person with a disability. And I also throw that question out to the audience because I find that our audience is a great wealth of resources and knowledge too. So if anybody would like to throw something in the chat, I know you mentioned some different Reddit groups, but are there any other particular places that you know that somebody can maybe volunteer to give their input?
Absolutely. So if you would love to contribute, I would definitely recommend just reaching out to different studios. Some of them are on LinkedIn. Some of them, I believe, have their own websites, or they're on different social media platforms. Even just reaching out and saying, hey, I heard you have a game in development. I'm a user with, so-and-so, XYZ. I would love to help testing. I think as well, just asking and putting yourself out there as well. It can be scary. If you're attending meetups as well, there are lots of gaming conventions around. There are lots of meetups and game nights and communities. Just putting yourself out there as well. And if you're too shy or for whatever reason you can't go out there, definitely check out, have a look at different Discord servers too. I believe there is a couple of different ones. Just one second. So there's Discord servers, like there's one called XR Devs, which is a great community for people who are developing for XR in different apps and games, which would be fantastic to have a look at. There's also Blind Chat. Now, Blind Chat is for mainly visually impaired or vision impaired gamers. I apologize, vision impaired gamers. Who often share their experience with games. But to reach out to devs, I would just jump into their Discord servers, email them, and yeah, reach out like that. Or if you know them in person, reach out to them as well in person.
Thank you. Next question's similar on those lines, but have the question, how much accessibility is there for someone who has very low vision and cannot read text in any of the games mentioned today? And they have just a comment, and they're a huge fan of Persona 3 Reload. So Atlas games are awesome.
Yes, Persona 3 Reload was fantastic. Out of those three games, I would definitely recommend Baldur's Gate. It has a lot of text-to-speech options. And 99.9% of that game is voiced. Metaphor ReFantazio with a console screen reader is also great in terms of readability. If you use a screen reader with it, it should be okay. But again, it all depends on the user themselves, and what accessibility options you can tailor to that, as well as, having the inbuilt accessibility features of your console with the game itself. I don't believe there's any dialogue in Superfruit Ninja, but again, the Apple Vision Pro does have voiceover, and I'm not entirely sure on how compatible that one is with voiceover. So don't quote me on that one. But another great game, if you would love to check out, is called Vale, which is VALE, Shadow of the Crown. That entire game was built with the help of a Canadian Vision Loss studio, or Vision Loss. They're very similar to Vision Australia here in Australia, a similar sort of not organization. And so that game would also be great to check out as well.
Thank you. Again, just before we have a few more questions. So there's a
Of
comment
course.
with a follow-up question to that. So something to consider in our current industry was the introduction of the Steam Deck. It gives players the ability to access PC games on a console-like device. So considering any kind of game that's reserved for PC, do you think it would be recommended to treat these games as though they are console games when designing them? Know that this could potentially be accessed through the Steam Deck.
That is a great question. The Steam Deck is a really cool console. Like this user said, it is a handheld console that you can play Steam games on. That would again come down to the accessibility options available for that game. Does it have a text scaling? Does it have different tutorial levels? How legible is it? And how's it going to look on a Steam Deck as well? Because there are also, I believe there's two different types of Steam Decks. There's the LCD and the OLED display. So I think it depends on which one you get, and in terms of the storage too. So I think the really cool thing, as with most of things in the accessibility industry, is it really is user dependent. And I can only speak for my personal experience. I don't have a Steam Deck yet. I'm definitely saving up for it. Australian import laws are fun. And trying to get your hands on one in Australia can be a little bit difficult. But it really depends on, does this game have the settings required for you, and check if it's going to work on a Steam Deck as well. So always do your research beforehand too.
Right, this next question, I'd like to also throw it out to the audience to maybe share if you have any favorites, but what are some examples of accessible controllers, and what are their capabilities that make them so accessible?
So the current accessible controllers, the most common one to look at is called the Xbox Adaptive Controller. This is designed, it is a first party, so it's designed by Xbox. It looks like a white square with two black circles, and it comes with different buttons that are quite tactile, and you can change the inputs for them. That also, I believe, works with a PC, as it's just a USB plug-in, I believe. The other most common one would be what PlayStation just released, which is their adaptive controller. It was called Project Leonardo for a while, but it is the PlayStation 5 Access controller, I believe. It's more circular and tactile, and it only works with PlayStation. There are so many other adaptive controllers out there. There's a Logitech set, which is more handheld based, and that I believe works with the adaptive controller for Xbox. And then there's also the Proteus, which is a smaller sort of handheld controller, which you can mold to your hands, and you can kind of design it yourself. So they would be the ones I'd check out. Other ones you've got, which are like the Tobii Eyes Gaze, which is TOBII, I think. I'm also dyslexic, so spelling's not my forte. But Tobii Eye Gaze. There's also different voice commands. Yeah, but there's a whole bunch of different adaptive controllers out there.
Well, thank you. So much knowledge on that. We do have, let's see, a question going back to your presentation. The person didn't quite get, I think, an eye gate. So not sure if they heard the name correctly, but wasn't sure what you meant. What is an eye gate?
Eye gaze. Sorry, eye gaze. So Gaze.
Gaze.
Eye gaze. I'm so sorry. Eye gaze. That is, it's a camera that can track your eye movement. and you can select, it kind of makes your eyes the pointer. A lot of people, with cerebral palsy might use it, or people with fine motor skills, or who would prefer to, or who can't use their hands to use a mouse or a keyboard for whatever reason, they could use an eye gaze system. Some games, like I believe it's Just Cause 3, that is able to be used with an Xbox Kinect back in the day when the Kinects were pretty popular. Yeah, so it's just it's a camera-based system that tracks your eyes, and some games are compatible with it as well, and some games are designed for it too. I know Forza can be used with an eye gaze system, Just Cause. A lot of Super Fruit Ninja can be used with an eye gaze system too. So yeah, excuse me.
Okay, our next question. How would you suggest one approach a scenario where an accessibility concern might conflict with a core mechanic of the game?
That is a great question, and something I'm currently trying to deal with under NDA. So this is why accessibility always has to be at the start. Accessibility, I know a lot of the time it comes halfway through, but that's really not the best practice. If you're having that issue, I would say this probably should have been addressed at the start, but if it's a core mechanic, let's look at, how this might work for someone who might have fine motor skills. Going back to those 5 different, types of video game accessibility. Is this, a blocking someone or disadvantaging a user with, low vision? Is it disadvantaging a user who can't hear? Or is it too much on the cognitive load? We should ask those questions and then go back to the designer or developer and say, these are the questions we have. How can we make this work? And it could be something as simple as, let's adjust for difficulty on it. There's a game called Uncharted, which actually has the option to skip certain puzzles or a mechanic if it actually can't be done. There are options for that. So if it's a core mechanic, then have a look at how we can interpret that mechanic to be able to be accessible would be my suggestion on that. And just having the open conversation, and then you can go, all right, for future, we should have the accessibility. We should have accessibility at the start before we even begin fleshing this out. Or while we're doing the game document, let's list all the accessibility features or concerns we might have.
Thanks, Tom. And this next question, I think if you might have talked about this maybe 2 slides ago, and if you could go back, but somebody's asking about suggestions for, maybe I take it back because it says mobile game accessibility guidelines. So that might be a little bit different than some of the other guidelines. General.
So the mobile games kind of would fall under the same principles here. So there's no separate guidelines for mobile games. And they would kind of also fall under, gaming accessibility guidelines, design patterns, even Xbox. I also use Xbox accessibility guidelines just to check, different contrast levels, different pixels, etc. So for mobile games, you're designing for something that has a touch screen. Now, if you're developing in Unity, which is one of the game engines out there, Unity is a free game engine and until you start making people pay for it. They're also a little bit controversial at the moment because they just laid off a bunch of people. But Unity has something called the Unity Accessibility plugin, which is free to download and add into your game. And it is free. It's free until it isn't. And that, I believe, connects to the assistive technology settings, like a screen reader on your phone. And it's all about, being creative and designing with a purpose. So if we're developing a mobile game, does the plugin work? Is it going to work with voiceover? Does it need to work with voice commands? People might want to play in a landscape mode. Is the layout dynamic and responsive? So again, questions to ask your developers when you're designing for a mobile game too.
Okay, these are some really great questions from the audience today. We just have a few more, and then we have a little bit of time. So next question, what would you recommend for indie developers who often have access to less resources than larger studios who want to start making their games more accessible?
That's a great question. I love that question. So I work with a lot of indie studios, and the best thing to do right now would be to have a look through the resources. So have a look at the Xbox accessibility guidelines, have a look at the APX design patterns, look at the gaming accessibility guidelines. And in the gaming accessibility guidelines, they also have great examples for each guideline available when you click on it. And so familiarize yourself with those guidelines. Don't use them as a checklist, but just familiarize yourself with them to understand what might be needed. The other best thing to do, especially for indie studios, is to reach out to, Reddit forums, reach out to Discord's servers, and reach out to gamers. Even reach out to Able Gamers Charity, who would have another great level of resources there. So reach out to Discord servers and Reddit to really see if you can find different plays, and you can put a call out saying, hey, we've got some free, usability testing. Your input would be really valuable. Kind of similar to the way some people do PhD studies. I was part of a PhD study a while back when I was in uni, where they just said, do you want to come play this game for a bit? I said, yeah, sure. All right, cool. Or I can offer you a bag of chips. That's great. I'll still come and play the game, because a lot of people will jump at the opportunity to play a game and give feedback. So I think just asking different communities and saying, we would love your feedback on this, would be a great place to start, as well as learning the resources.
Great. A little different topic here. Any 3D printables that you could recommend as controller options?
3D printables. That's great. That's a great question. I'm sure there's so many different free 3D printable STL files out there for that. I personally don't know off the top of my head. But you can definitely 3D print different extenders of not Joy-Cons, analog sticks, or different tactile buttons as well. You can get little tactile bumps as well that kind of are adhesive and stick to controllers. In terms of 3D printing, not off the top of my head, but I'm sure if you go to is it Printverse? Printverse. Not Printverse. It's something verse. Thingiverse. Thank you very much. Thingiverse. Yes, Thingiverse, I believe, is a free library that has hundreds of thousands of different still files you can have a look at. Yes, Thingiverse. That's what it was called. Thank you very much, chat. And if you typed in, if we just go to Thingiverse, and if you type in, adaptive controller or something, there would be files that would pop up. Yeah, something like that. So I would definitely recommend try Thingiverse. Would be my suggestion for that.
Let's see. There's another comment with a question follow-up. Something that might help designers or developers is looking at older games that may not have taken these things into consideration or concern. Are there potential older games that have already been released that we can look at that could demonstrate why these guidelines design patterns are important?
100%. If you're looking and doing some research on different games, go for it. One game that I would absolutely recommend, though, that does do accessibility great is GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64. That was a fantastic game. That was one of the first games you could really kind of change the controllers. The Nintendo 64 controller was a very strange design, but you could change certain buttons on it. So that was like one of the first games able to do that as well. Other games, you could have a look at games from the 90s, games from the 80s. Definitely just have a look at different games and figure out, okay, well, these are products of their time. Let's have a look at what they did. This is, again, like a lot of people who research and work in different fields will go back and look at older things and be like, okay, well, the language here is incorrect, because it's of a different time period. So definitely have a look at some older games. Maybe 90s PC games, those isometric building sims. And you can kind of see how it developed as well.
Just a quick question here. If you could go back to what were the guidelines that you mentioned with the word apex in the name?
So it's called the APX design patterns.
APX.
APX, I'll put it in the chat for you.
Okay.
So APX design patterns, they are done by Able Gamers Charity. And these are more patterns that can be used by developers to have a look at trying different things. The most popular one that I like to use from that is called second channel. So second channel means if there is audio, there has to be a visual to go with it, because if you can't hear it, you can see it, but if you can't see it, you can hear it. So having a secondary indicator is kind of how the second channel one works. But there's, I think, between 12 and 20 design patterns there to have a look at, and they're free to have a look at too. You can also buy like cards as well to like physically have, but you can look at them online as well.
Okay, we just have a few minutes left. A question regarding how do you accommodate those with additional needs and requirements without subtracting positive experience from those who do not need accommodations?
We ask them. I think the best thing to do is just to chat to someone. Like if I have a tester coming in, I ask questions and be honest. Like this is what the game's got already, and I stress this is a beta version of the game, so this is not the final product. This is what you're here for. So when I'm testing, always ask. If you're playing a game, if you've got the final game at home and you have it, you load it up, just have a look through the accessibility options menu and see what works for you. Because again, everyone is different, and that's the beauty of accessibility, is like how do we make things work for so many different people by having the options there.
All right, let's see if I can squeeze in these last two questions. We'll make these the last two for this afternoon. So my preference, and this, I will open this up to the audience too. My preference as a player would be to have separate accessibility modes that can be enabled or disabled as needed. What is the prevailing thinking on this?
So having accessibility modes that can toggle on and off, is that?
I think that's how I understood it.
Okay.
Yes.
Again, just having a look. So, some people might play a game with an adaptive controller one day and then might not need it the next day. You might want enlarged subtitles one day, you might not need them as big the next day. So just toggling them on and off. If that's what works for you, then go for it. If you're just playing for fun and just having a good time, toggle them on and off as you please. Something I like to remind developers is people are going to buy your game. It is their money that they're spending on your game. They can do whatever they like with it. They can play it however they want. They can use whatever settings they want. If they have spent money on an adaptive controller and would like to use them, they're going to use them. So do whatever you like, whatever makes you feel comfortable when playing that game.
Okay, and our final question today, do you have any testing suggestions for harmful accessibility needs, such as strobing effect that can happen in many multiplayer games? Keeping the strobing effect out in the design is one thing, but issues aren't always apparent until you have many players.
I have never worked with a strobing effect as much before. I would raise that if you're testing that game, then I would absolutely raise that with the developer. Otherwise, if it's a game that's already made and you've bought it, you could also reach out to the developer as well. In terms of testing it, unless there's an option to turn it on or off, and that's tricky. I would just reach out to the developer and say, hey, there's a strobing effect here. How do we go about it? So I would always just reach out and ask, if I'm honest.
I was trying to share my screen.
Oh, sorry, I'll stop sharing. I apologize.
Oh, no, you were
me.
fine, but for some reason I'm seeing a black screen, so I'm not sure what happened to my my slides. Okay.
What I will do is I will just pop.
Okay, there it is. I think so. Well, first, I just wanted to thank you so much, Dom, for that presentation today, and what great, questions, very active audience there. Everybody seemed to enjoy this topic. So again, thank you so much for your time and for getting up so early. I know it was so early for you, so we really appreciate that. And
It's very early. I will be going back to bed and I will respond to
Oh,
questions
good.
in 3 hours.
And
It's
just
all good.
I wanted to thank our captioner and our interpreters today. So again, just some upcoming, whoops. Yeah, I'm showing the beginning. Ah, there we go. Now I'm on the correct slide. So I just wanted to share with our audience that's still on today. We do have some other webinars coming up. This was a subject matter expert webinar. Like I said, I think we have 6 of these various topics scheduled throughout the year. Then we have 2 monthly series that every month there's one focuses on digital accessibility and one on the built environment. So next week we're kicking off our 2025 digital series. We had a double up in February because we did not get one in January. So next Tuesday is understanding the why around neurodivergent inclusive web design, and followed up on Thursday with designing wearable technologies for users with disabilities. And then coming up on March 5th is a webinar that's part of the Built Environment series, Best Practices for Accessible Design in Public Spaces. So these monthly series webinars are free to members and available for a fee for non-members. So if you're interested in becoming a member and learning about other professional development opportunities, please feel free to reach out or check us out on the website. So thank you, everybody, for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.